Welcome to another excellent Aztlander presentation, The Hidden Dead, Science and Sensationalism in Maya Mortuary Cave Research with Gabriel Wrobel, professor in the Department of Anthropology at Michigan State University. Enjoy!
Well, again, thank you, Jim, for the nice introduction and the invitation to speak here. Really appreciate it. Thanks to all you guys who tuned in today as well. I'll just give a little warning for Barb McLeod and Jim Brady and maybe a couple of others. This is stuff you've seen before, so if you, as Jim mentioned, I'm doing some new research on the coast now, so this is a little bit of some of the thoughts that I've had before about my previous work and some of the cave sites in Central Belize. But moving on, what oh, no. All right. So when I first started as a bioarchaeologist in graduate school, I was really excited about some new research that was coming out of the American Southwest. And this focused on claims of cannibalism that were circulating around Anasazi tribes in the Southwest. This was done by Christy Turner, a very well-known and respected physical anthropologist, and his wife, Jacqueline Turner. And it got a lot of headlines. And so for a long time, I just sort of thought, oh, this is really interesting. And it certainly was sensational and it was very attention grabbing. It got the attention of a lot of not only academic journals, but it also, was reported widely in, the New York Times and various publications for more of a general audience. And I thought, oh, this is really great. What wound up happening, however, with this was that archaeologists, in the meantime, while all of this was going on, there was a lot of archaeologists who had spent a lot of work and time in the Southwest, and they were really like upset about what this research was. And eventually they wrote a piece that came out called Dismembering the Trope. And what they were talking about was they were talking about generally the lack of archaeological context that went into some of the interpretations that were happening out there with the American Southwest. There certainly was some skeletal evidence of modification to bones. Some of this could have been violence, perimortem violence. Some of it later turned out to be postmortem violence, postmortem violence. And there were also taphonomic processes going on as well. Furthermore, the context was one that there hadn't been a lot of attention paid. Everything that was out west was kind of grouped into one group of people, despite time and space. And so what you wound up getting is this mishmash of all of these archaeological contexts where Christy Turner had kind of picked and chosen what he wanted to talk about. And he then came up with this big theory that the Southwest was being invaded by Mexican populations that were terrorizing the Southwest in part by killing them and eating them. And so what it turned out is that this really had like no basis in reality. Despite this, the sensationalist nature of cannibalism and violence in the past has really continued to gain a lot of traction. We see a lot of academic work that's focused on this, and through scholarly research in all different areas in the world, including, Europe and South America and certainly Central America, where I'll be talking today as well. And what I would say is that this isn't necessarily a problem. Certainly, there is a lot of violence in the past, and some of that violence is, well, quite creative in nature. But what I starting to have been reacting to a lot is really what I feel like goes a little bit overboard. I'm a scientist. I like science, and so what I feel is that when you're making these interpretations of the past, you really have to be very careful and back them up with a lot of scientific fact and this investigation and good scientific methods. Instead, what we get is we get sort of this conversation that devolves then into a lot of sensationalism. And so people get excited because, this idea that, people are so horrible to each other in the past. And, certainly people watch shows about serial killers. So there's also an interest in what's going on in the present as well. And I just feel like archaeology shouldn't feed into those narratives when there is better science and better, sort of more interesting stories to tell. So my point is, I'm going to be preaching caution during this talk as well. This is not unusual. We see a lot of times with archaeology, you've probably seen this meme before, but archaeologists like to tell stories. That's what we like to do. And if we're not talking about ourselves and our own field experiences, we talked about ancient peoples, and we want the world to see them as interesting, as to be as interested in the past as we are. And so what we find is that we actually get a lot of positive feedback from a lot of these more sensationalistic stories too. And so this, in some cases, can turn from looking at these multiple complex social and economic factors to just the broad category of ritual. What does ritual mean? That's not always very, very clear. But I'm going to be exploring just one aspect of that today. And I'm going to be talking about some of my previous research in Central Belize. And so this is work that's been going on. I started working in this area in 2005. Some other people have worked in this area as well. And one of the things that drew me to this is that it has some very unusual mortuary contexts. I am a bioarchaeologist, so what my focus is and my specialty is looking at skeletal remains from archaeological sites and really trying to put together a lot of complex data about the lives and deaths of these individuals and then put them into a social context and try to interpret that in the best way that I can. So what you're seeing here is a lot of the articles that have come out about Central Belize, and a lot of the interpretations are right there, front and center on this as well. And so what we do as scientists is we kind of evaluate each other's work, and we often disagree. Sometimes we agree, often we disagree about what the data exactly mean. And so part of what I'm going to do today too is walk you through a little bit of my thought processes, working with some of the data that I've uncovered to kind of explain why I believe what I do about the Maya and about some of the ways that they use these spaces for mortuary practices. And just a hint, if you couldn't tell from the title, I'm a bit skeptical. Actually, I'm fairly skeptical of the sacrifice theme that has arisen time and time again in Central Belize. I'm not saying that this is not something that the Maya did, but the Maya are a culture that has spanned more than 2,000 years and over a massive geographic context. So when we say the Maya, we have to also talk about a little bit of what we mean by the Maya. Just because the Maya in one area did something doesn't mean the Maya in another area did something in the exact same way. So generally, what we see is that a lot of the conversations that people have about the cave context in Central Belize and in other areas as well relate really quite broadly to questions about the Maya collapse. For instance, here, this is a really interesting study by Doug Kennett and his partners and his colleagues. And what they're doing is they're looking at speleothems in caves, sort of like tree rings, and they're looking at how the annual rainfall fluctuated over time. So really, really interesting. And what they're able to do then is they're able to demonstrate, for instance, in this top graph where you see it's blue and the wiggly line goes up to the blue. This is where there's lots and lots of rain. And then where it dips down into the red, this is where you're starting to get droughts or you're getting really prolonged periods of dryness. Keep in mind, this comes from one cave. And so again, trying to extrapolate this to the entirety of what's going on in the Maya area is really, really tough. But what you're also seeing is that throughout the Maya history, you're seeing periods of wet and periods of dry. All right. Some of those periods of dry do seem to correlate. They seem to fall into the classic Maya collapse period, which is the 9th century AD. But you can see some that happened in the 10th century, and you can see some that happened in the 8th century, 6th century, 5th century, etc. So you have periodic droughts that are occurring. But one of the things that people are asking in cave context is they're using caves to ask the question, how did people respond to environmental stresses? So we know a lot about how the Maya responded to environmental stresses. The Maya had a really, really complex social organization. They had a very complex political organization and economic organization, and they were incredibly skilled farmers. Recent LiDAR studies have shown immense modifications to environments where they're trapping water, they are pooling water, they are growing a variety of different plants, they're eating different plants. Some of them are more resistant to drought. They're actually changing the maize that they're eating. That's a can be adapted to drier environments. So there's a ton of different types of responses that I find really interesting to this question of how do the Maya deal with drought. One of the things that the cave research has responded a lot to is they've sort of done that more I, the ritual response. People who study caves are very interested in ritual because they are a place of ritual. And so what you tend to get is you tend to get answers that are focused around that ritual, right? Rather than corn genomics or stuff, other things out on the landscape related to, modifications of that landscape to trap water and to grow crops better as well. So what I started doing then is I started looking a little bit as I started working in this area. There was a lot of talk from some of my colleagues about ritual in caves and specifically sacrificial ritual. And so I started reading a lot about caves. Some of the work of some of the audience members here, for instance, Jim Brady's work and Barb McLeod's work, and Dory Reentz's work. And what I was really interested in is kind of how, like, well, what are the ideas that people have about it? If you read ethnography about the Maya and about their cave use, what they tend to talk about in cave use is they tend to talk about descent groups' worship of lineage ancestors. And so there's this creation, there's these ideas about creation myths. People come from caves in some situations. They visit caves, and there's great association between caves and settlements and kinship groups as well. So we do know that people use caves for ancestor worship. We also know that they used it for corporate or territorial claims as well, so land claims. This is a really great example. Some of the work by some of my colleagues in Mexico, Vera Tiesler and Andrea Cucino, who visited a Lacandon Maya cave at the site of Mensabac. And this is a site that community visits quite regularly. They rearrange the bones into these shrine. So every time they come, they say, "Oh, what do you think?" This is like the new setup that they have, or they've shifted it around. And if you ask the Lacandon, they say, "Oh yeah, these are our ancestors, and we come to pay respect to our ancestors as well." If you look a little further back and you look at ethnohistory, so you look at the first Spanish, for instance, that are coming into the area, and they're kind of watching the Maya and they're writing down their observations. These aren't trained ethnographers, but they're just writing what they see, and they're writing it through this lens of mostly Spanish culture. So they're like, "Wow, that's not very Spanish," and then they write down kind of what they see, and they try to understand it through their own worldview. And what we find is we just don't have a lot of information. I mean, cave use is rarely mentioned at all. Usually, when it is, it's in reference to ancestor venerations. There are a few known references to violence that occur in connection with caves, but I'm going to point out that these are actually not firsthand. These are secondhand or third hand or more accounts of violence that are occurring in these cave situations. And so within these accounts, you just don't see sacrifice or ritual murder. You don't have really any descriptions of this. And it seems to be absent or at least very, very rare among colonial period Maya groups. That can be, just depends on how much you believe the Spanish in this case. But I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So if this was present, if this violence in caves was present, it was likely not a focus of this type of ritual, though perhaps we just didn't know. Like it could be hidden, and so we don't know. This is one on the right. You can see one example, and this is in the Madrid Codex, and it appears to be a person who is bound, with their hands bound behind their back, or at least one of their hands behind their back, and they are over this cave-like entrance with a sign for bones in it. So something's going on there. The eyes are open; they seem to be alive, but kind of hard to figure out exactly what's happening with that. We also see, if you go even further back to the classic period, you can actually see some writing about caves and some mentions of caves. And again, there's really no clear indication where they're writing, like we sacrificed a bunch of people in these caves. Like there is no such writing for that. We do have several texts that refer to the caves in the context of funerary rituals and subsequent tomb re-entry ceremonies. And we have archaeological evidence of elite rituals and tomb-like structures within caves in some caves, and these suggest elite mortuary use as well. So, what were the elite doing in these caves? Again, this is some of the things that we are trying to figure out. What we get though is we people have been asking this question for quite a while. So, for instance, if you go back to like the 1940s and earlier, there is this idea of sacrifice that are occurring in these cenote sites, which are sinkholes. So they're cave-like structures that lead into the ground. So the cenote of sacrifice, as they call it at Chichen Itza, this is on the right. You can see a young maiden being thrown down into the cenote with by during this ritual ceremony, and she's got this ballet pose. It's very very Nat Geo and at that time period. But what was interesting is that the cenote was dredged. Here you can see that on the left. And so, amongst all of the amazing artifacts that were thrown into this cave, we do find human remains. And so, these were actually first looked at by a physical anthropologist, Ernest Houghton. And what he found is that these are not maidens. There's a lot of males in there, there's children, there's adults. This is an adult male right here in the center with a big hole through his head that would have allowed him to be placed on a cimpatle, which is a like a skull rack, basically. So clearly, this space, this cenote, is important. People are putting things and people into it as well. And so something is going on there. This is imbued with some ritual significance. And again, our question is, what is that ritual significance? Okay, so again, the idea of sacrifice in caves and that linkage is pervasive in not only the archaeological literature today, but also in like popular literature as well. And again, as I mentioned, with the colonial accounts, you have some colonial accounts, but none of them are direct. So where do the ideas of sacrifice in caves come from? And what these can be traced back to is they can be traced back to one set of papers. These are the Quijada papers. These come out of Merida, which was at the time one of the main colonial cities of the Spanish in the Yucatan, and it's near, more or less, sort of near Chichen Itza. And we also see it a little bit in the writings of Diego de Landa, who is the bishop of the Yucatan in the 16th century and was also sort of a historian, if you want to call them that. He wrote down a lot of his observation of the Maya. But this is a really important contextual point that we need to make here. Are these accounts where they are talking about idolatry and they're talking about sacrifice and people killing each other, are these that, and this is the Spanish writing them down, the Spanish aren't seeing them, the Maya are telling them about it. And how reliable are those accounts? And the thing to know here is that Diego de Landa is quite famous for his brutal tactics. He's the reason we don't have a lot of books, Maya books, because he burned them all. He burned idols. He burned anything that he thought was not in line with his beliefs and the teachings of his church. This was also the time of the Inquisition. So in Spain, you have the very famous Spanish Inquisition where they're torturing people. They were doing the exact same thing in the New World, where they were trying to root out idolatry and they were doing any tactics. So basically, they're hanging people upside down, they're cutting limbs off, they're torturing them, and they're asking them if they're engaged in idolatrous behavior. And quite unsurprisingly, the answer after being tortured a long time is yeah, whatever. Like whatever you say, that's what we're doing. And so again, I'm not saying it's not true, but it's suspicious, right? Like I think that as historians, as anthropologists, we need to look on that with some suspicion, and that deserves kind of a higher threshold of evidence to say that yeah, the Spanish were right on this. So, what do I think? Did the Maya practice ritualized murder? So, in other words, a public murder, socially sanctioned murder, and murder that was, occurred through these very set rules, like these very set practices. And the answer is absolutely. We have evidence for this, quite extensive evidence that this occurred in a number of different contexts and in a number of different ways. So, for instance, I've actually published on some of this. I published, for instance, a paper on human trophy skulls from a site in Belize, and so these were buried with a warrior. Actually, these are two different cases of this, but they were buried with warriors, what appear to be warriors, and these appear to be skulls that were taken from captured enemies and were worn around the victorious warrior's neck, which is, pretty impressive. That would be quite the statement to make. You can see that there's actually glyphs and cartouches that are carved on here. They're decorated. They would have been painted. They would have had feathers coming out from them. So you can imagine some warrior walking out with the decorated head of one of his enemies hanging around his neck. That's that's a statement, right? Okay. So with that said, I believe I went into this with open mind. I've been told that these were all sacrificial context. And so as I started looking, what I became curious about is that I just wasn't seeing a lot of evidence for it. So I want to walk you through some of the evidence and some of the context that we're looking at so you can get a sense of kind of what we're looking for, what I'm seeing, and then how I'm interpreting what it is that I'm seeing. So my project, where I worked for about 15 years until COVID, kind of ended it, and then I just needed to do something else for a while. This is the Belize Archaeological Survey. It occurs in Central Belize. And so where you can see here is that on to the south, you have that darker area. These are the mountains, the Maya mountains. And then you see all of these small streams that are coming out of the mountains, and they're all coalescing into large rivers, into the Caves Branch River, into the Saboon River, and into tributaries of the Belize River as well. And what's happening then is as they're doing that, they're gaining steam, they're gaining force, and they're working their way through the porous limestone shelf that goes from the north of the Maya Mountain, just north of the Maya Mountains, all the way through the Yucatan Peninsula. And what they're doing is that over the millennia, they've carved out these huge river caves, and they are, and the Maya loved these caves. Every crack and crevice, the caves, no matter how big or small, will have evidence of Maya. The Maya spent a lot of time in these caves, which is pretty magnificent considering that they didn't have our nice headlights that we have today, our headlamps. They were in there with pine torches. We still see the ash from these pine torches and some of the smoke stains on the ceilings as well. My research focused on a number of these sites. So I worked at a series of rock shelters. And then also I worked at some of the mortuary caves and have looked at some of the mortuary, the data from some of the mortuary caves in other areas of Belize. This includes some of the work of Jim Brady as well at Midnight Terror Cave. This is probably the most famous of these caves. If you've been to Belize and you've been in a cave, it was probably Octoon Tunichio McNall. This is the famous Crystal Maiden, who is no longer visible. They won't let you see her anymore, but they'll show you a picture of her and they'll promise that she is right up on the ledge above you. But this is a magnificent cave. I had the honor of seeing this cave before the tourists were let in, and it was just myself and Christoph Helmke, and it was I couldn't believe it. This is one of the things that actually got me interested in cave research. And so what you see is you see the remains of a number of individuals, around 15 individuals that are scattered throughout this cave, including adults like the two that you see here, and then you see some subadults as well, a couple of infants too in this cave. Um, where I worked, I did a lot of research in this particular cave. This is something known as Jarethtiel, which means like bone cave, I believe. This was named by the Mennonites, which you can see in the bottom left picture. This is on one of their farms, and they were quite they asked the Institute of Archaeology for us to come and take the skeletons out of the caves because the kids kept going in there and playing in them, and they were a little nervous about this. So we did that, and we worked there for a few years. This was a very small cave, but it was difficult to navigate. So you can see in the top left picture, that's the entrance of the cave. So you had to kind of climb in backwards to get in that cave. So this is me entering the cave. I think that's me, somebody entering the cave on the right. And then you can sort of see this cave. If you look at the scale, that's a 5 meter bar. So this cave's like 50 meters long. It's really not that long at all. The Mennonites built these ladders. We had to crawl through this. Had to crawl through. That is all bat guano. So we had to do like army crawls through the back guano, go through another larger chamber, and then in the very back of the cave, it opens up and there's another larger chamber. This is feature 5. And when you poke your head, so this student right here is poking her head through, she's looking into that feature, and this is what you see. So these are all skeletons. The skeletons are, there was 9 individuals back there, and they were scattered mostly. It looked like a bunch of scattered bones. As we started slowly excavating it and documenting it, what we noticed is that some of the bones were moved around and some of them are actually still articulated. So these were clearly put in here as articulated bodies. And so this is a really good opportunity. This is one of those situations where we often hear this is interpreted as sacrifice. And so I was like, all right, we have sacrifice. I'm going to document this. And as I started looking, as I said, things started not quite adding up with what I was expecting. So first, a word then about bioarchaeology and caves. Caves are hard to work in. First of all, these are surface deposits. So what you get then is you can get a 6,000-year-old spear point right next to a 1,300-year-old skeleton right next to a candy wrapper. And they're all seemingly, there's no stratigraphy. There's very little stratigraphy in these caves, in most areas of these caves. Additionally, there's a lot of taphonomic factors. In addition to looting, for instance, you also have drip water. So this skull on the right is covered in what are known as popcorn formations that are caused by splattering water. And so this is just covering the skull. And for the most part, can't really do much analysis on the skull. It's just covered in rock, so it's a fossil. And then furthermore, what you wind up getting is you get just an incredible complexity of Maya mortuary ritual. If you study the Maya and you study mortuary practices at all, you know that everywhere from their very, very beginnings, as sort of a culture we would call, the Maya, and until even today, they have very, very complex mortuary rituals. They move their bodies around a lot. They put them in very strange positions. They had rules, right? And those rules changed over space, over time. And we frankly don't know what all those rules are. And so when we're interpreting things, we're making a lot of it, like no matter what, me too, like we're just making a lot of assumptions, because we don't have ancient Maya to ask. So here's a few of these large caves. And one of the things I wanted you to see is that, especially the 2 large ones, this is Aktun Kabul, which I'll talk about in a second, where I worked, Midnight Terror Cave, where Jim Brady ran a project for several years under Jaime Aue's permit. And what you'll notice is that those are quite close to the large ceremonial centers of Tipanchenhuitz, Yaxbe, and even Cahuetzna. Cahuetzna on the left is actually right across the river from Actun Tunachil. So what you're seeing then is you're seeing at least a spatial relationship between the cities, these civic ceremonial centers, where obviously you have big pyramids, you have big open plazas, ceremonies are being practiced there, and these more hidden spaces, these caves. Again, our question is, what is that relationship? So as a bioarch, what I look at is I look at a number of different types of data. I'm particularly interested in the skeletons and the stories of those humans who wound up in the caves, trying to figure out who they were, obviously why they wound up in the caves, and also what does their story have to tell us about the larger story of the Maya and of humankind in general. So some of the data that I'm really interested in are, for instance, the timing of deposits, the age and sex distributions of the individuals that are buried there, the pathologies, genetic relatedness between those individuals, and also things like perimortem trauma, which might give some indication that the person met with a violent end. So the context of cave use is a little bit tough. As I said, it's all one layer. We don't have a nice stratigraphy in most cases, and direct dating of the bones is quite hard. We don't have always the best preservation in these sites. The bones look good, but there's often not a lot of collagen. So it's hard to run radiocarbon dates, for instance, directly on those bones. Mostly what we get is we base these on ceramic associations. So we look at the pottery that's left that people haven't taken out of the cave, and those are the dates. They say, oh, for instance, this shoe pot, for instance, dates to the late determinal classic period. So therefore, the bodies around them may also date to the late determinal classic period. And that's actually when most of these deeper caves are used for mortuary practices. So I'm going to call these dark zone caves because these are caves that are dark. And so if you go to the back, you need lighting to get there. We use headlamps. The Maya would have used pine torches. And when we look at all of these caves throughout Central Belize, what we find is that they are consistently associated with late terminal classic ceramics. Near the entrances of these caves, you'll often get earlier ceramics, but deeper into the caves, all the ceramics are later. And so this is a really interesting period. This happens, we see this at Aktun Tunachil, Jareftil, Aktun Kabul, the big caves that I was talking about earlier in this area. So what's going on around these caves while they're being used for mortuary practices? This is a really key thing to understand. This dates then to the middle to late classic period. So this is like 500 AD through about 900 AD. And what we see is that I was also doing excavations not only in the caves, but my colleagues and my project were actually doing them on some of the big sites nearby. And what we found is that the sites nearby are quite large. There are big pyramidal structures there. We found carved stone monuments, like up on the left, for instance. This is a ball court player who was a king. So he was playing the ball game. And so these are big, important sites. Found ceramics with glyphs on them that link these sites to Tikal, for instance. And so they're talking with the big boys, right? And the Maya heartland as well. And so what we're seeing though is looters' trenches. And this picture with the three guys, or three of our workmen, behind them is a giant pyramid that is at the largest of these sites, and it was looted, like big looters' trench going through the center. And what they found was that the entire structure was built in one episode. So what they did is they just piled rocks as high as they could, and then they covered the whole thing with sort of more cut stones, and then they plastered it. And so it looked like a giant old pyramid, but really it was a brand new, it was a brand new pyramid. What's going on? You have rapid urbanization. Prior to this, you just have little farming villages. But all of a sudden, people move into the area, and you have they're building these big cities. They're building big roads that are connecting these hubs as well. And what this is suggesting too is a migration, not only a movement of people, but of ideas too. And some of our new genetic data is starting to back this up as well. Um, Now, the question is, what's the role of droughts during this time? And the fact of the matter is that you just have a lot of people that are moving into the area. They seem to be doing really well. They're expanding really, really greatly until they're not. And then at a certain point, all of these sites, just like we see throughout Guatemala, into Honduras, up into parts of Mexico as well, they seem to be depopulated, if not abandoned completely. And droughts certainly may play a pivotal role in this. Nobody has established this for sure as well. But what I'm going to come back to later on is not only is there may be droughts, but you also, what we do know for sure is that this is a time of incredibly fast population growth. There's more people in this area than there had been previously before the caves started being used. The dark zone caves in the back started being used. What we also know is that we see little traces of northern Yucatan influences that are occurring during the late classic period. So this is groups like Chichen Itza and the people around them. These are people that are coming from Chichen Itza has people have come from the west, from central Mexico, and they've brought their ideas and frankly a lot of really violent imagery with them. I think we think this is where the skull masks and the idea of these skull masks that we talked about previously come from as well. And so we know from round structures, we know from ceramics that there definitely is an influx of people coming from the Yucatan. So one question is, did they bring these ideas of violence and of killing with them? And maybe that is. I mean, so there certainly is a pathway to see that there might be violence occurring in some of these cave sites. Right. So what's going on? Is it just a lot of people, or is it Yucatan coming down with their violent ideas? It's a good question. So let's test some of these ideas with some of the data that we have. One of the big things, and I think this is what I'm going to focus on for this talk, is probably the data that has received the most attention for these sites. One of the things that people have pointed out is that the burials don't form that are found in caves don't form a normal death distribution. So in other words, if everybody who just died and like you would find in a cemetery, you have a good sense of how many adults, how many children, et cetera. And what we see is that it does not match that. How do we know? Well, one of the things we're really good at as physical anthropologists is we're really, really good at figuring out age at death. We can use this from the skeletons themselves, especially subadults, where we look at the size of the bones, we look at whether or not the growth plates have fused, and probably the best thing to do is to look at the teeth and dental eruption. So if you see a kid whose front teeth, adult teeth have just come in, that kid's around 7. And so we can extend this to the whole dentition, and we can look at this with skeletal remains as well. With older individuals, it's more about like your body falling apart. We're like, wow, that person's body is really falling apart. They must be old. So we can be a little bit more exact than that, but you get the idea. There's no more growth. It's only downhill, as you know, at a certain point. Okay, so what does the study of age distributions tell us? Well, individual age at death are combined to characterize and compare groups to one another. So what it gives us, for instance, you can calculate the average age at death. You can figure out, kind of the life expectancy of individuals in particular situations. And this gives us things like life tables, trying to understand how many people died at different ages, and also age at death distributions. So, for instance, here are some of these death profiles. At the top, you have a sort of a colonial kind of contact era population in Libin, Ohio. And what you can see is this is a very normal distribution. You have a lot of infants, and then when you drop down to childhood, you have fewer children because all of the sort of more sickly infants have died, and so the kids that are remaining are more robust. You have a little bit more teens, and then you have some young individuals as well. But another thing you can see is that if you look at all of these different sites, they're quite different from one another. If you look at our data from the United States today, for instance, you're going to see a very, very small proportion of infants because we don't have a lot of infant mortality compared to these populations. So context actually really, really matters. It's one of the things that makes the study of age distributions interesting because you have to explain why one group looks different than another. Now, this is one thing, it's who's dying. But what age distributions also do is they reflect who we're finding. And that's a really, really important distinction because it's not just who you're, you know, if you look at, for instance, a military cemetery, you're not going to see a lot of kids, right? You're not going to see a lot of old people either. You're not going to see as many females. Increasingly, you'll see more females, but especially in older cemetery, you're just not going to see very many of them. And so, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that that the population was all made up of males. It just means that these are people that we're finding, in this particular situation. But I'm going to hint at something I'm going to say later. In that situation with the military cemetery, what do you think the other cemeteries look like that date to the same time period? That makes sense. So right during World War II, you have a lot of guys being buried in military cemeteries. So does that change the age and sex distribution in the cemeteries within cities, for instance, and towns? Absolutely. You're like, where are all the middle age, where are all the young males? And well, they're buried somewhere else. So our age distribution changes cemeteries all over the place. I hope that makes sense. All right. So what does age distributions in caves look like in this area? And so one of the things I did is I looked at all of these different caves and I've coded them or color shaded them, or I guess just shaded them. And what you're seeing then is you're seeing kind of a general age distribution within these caves. One of the things you can see is that the caves are quite different from one another. They have different age distributions in them. Some of them have more older adults, some of them have more infants, etc. In general, though, if you look at it as a conglomerate, you notice that there is an underrepresentation of infants. Like we just don't see enough infants usually, and middle adults and old adults as well. As a result of that, we see an overrepresentation of children, adolescents, and young adults. What does that mean? All right, good question. All right. One of the things you should ask is, should we expect a normal distribution in a Maya mortuary context? All right, so if you look at a cave, people are saying, oh, but it's not a normal distribution. And my answer to that, I think most physical anthropologists' answer to that is, yeah, of course not, because there are no normal distributions in caves. Sorry, not caves, just any Maya site. It's very, very rare to see this, especially in elite contexts where you see a lot of complex mortuary practices as well. The question then is, does the abnormal distribution, the non-normal distribution, do these show similarities to ethnohistoric accounts of rain-related sacrifice? So we're going to answer that now. But just before we do, take a look at some of these distributions up top. I showed you before what they should look like. So notice on Libin up at the top, you see like a lot of infants, and then it's sort of fewer children. It goes up towards young adults. And then as more and more people die, there's fewer people who live to old age to actually die, which is why you have fewer old adults. But take a look at Aguateca in the middle there on the left. What do you see? No infants, no children. Let's take a look at Dos Pilos. What do you see? No infants, no children, barely any children, and just a few teens. If you look at some of these other sites, well, we don't have very many burials at those, but you're noticing that the other age distributions are a little bit odd as well. If you look at this bottom distributions, this is from my colleagues Cucina and Tiesler, and they were looking at sites all over the Yucatan. And one of the things that you're noticing is that they're dividing this up by high status burials, which are the dark line, low status burials, which are the gray line, and then non-funerary things that kind of don't like maybe sacrifice. They don't know. They can't quite figure out. They don't seem to be just in a normal burial. And one of the things that you're seeing then is that the high status individuals, the ones that are buried in tombs, look quite different than the low status burials, right? And that's not because there's this vast difference in um, the groups. It's this is who we're finding, right? So it's not like they're dying that much differently. It's not like the elites don't have any dead babies, but we just don't find them. Hmm. All right. So, good examples of what we're looking for is this is a site from Cuevo del Lazo, which is in western Chiapas. So, this is technically right on the border of the Maya area. This is a late classic date. And this dry cave had 11 individuals that were found in these bundles. Really amazing preservation. They have textiles with them, they have plant remains. They're all under 6. All of the kids are suffering really badly from pathology. So, they're all very, very sickly kids. And what's really interesting is that based on all the preservation that we have there, this shows direct correlates with ethnohistoric accounts of Aztec sacrificial Aztec sacrifices that are associated with fertility. And so they're trying to bring, they're trying to basically send these kids to the afterlife to petition for, um, good crops, for instance. Another one, a little bit closer to home in the Maya area. This is the right next to the famous cenote at Chichen Itza, and it's a very small cave. I talked to one of the original excavators, or actually one of the original analysts on this, Lourdes Marquez, and she said that people had excavated this and they brought this big box and she saw it and she said, well, what's this? What's in the box? And they said, oh, no, 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 that's all chicken bones. And she's, what? Chicken bones? And so she looked at them and they were all children. The people who had excavated them didn't recognize these as are humans' bones. And so what she did is they were all mixed up. None of them were articulated. She looked at um, them and she found that there was about 109 individuals. All of these are children. Most of them are about 3 to 9 years old and what you can see is that the graph on the right, this shows all the different elements. So using the humerus, using the radius, using the femur, and she's seeing the pretty much the same thing. What she's finding is that you have mostly kids right around the age of 5 or 6. This is when most of the kids that's how old most of the kids are when they're in there. And a recent genetic analysis has shown these are all boys. So this looks very, very suspicious. And it does look a lot like some of the descriptions that we see from the Spanish, for instance. And it also looks like some of the rain ceremonies that have been described not only in ethnohistoric literature, but in other areas in non-Maya world, like further west as well. So do the caves in Belize look like this? And the answer is not really, but there are some similarities. So the age range in general does favor children. And so in some ways, that's similar to ethnohistoric descriptions of rain-related sacrificial rituals. Children, we do see like the rituals suggest an emphasis on 5 to 7 year olds, and we seem to have a lot of 5 to 7 year olds in these caves. Some of these, however, are young adults. According to the ethnohistoric accounts, these should be mostly be female, and what we see is that there's equally split between males and females in these caves. We also don't see any infants or almost no infants, and we see very, very few older adults as well. And so that's sort of similar to like maybe this cave in Chichen Itza, but you're going to see it's very, very different. Notice here, it really does hover right around 5 to 7 years old, but then it quickly tapers out. The oldest individual you have is probably in their, adolescent age, 15 to 18, and then that's it. And that's only a couple of individuals. Most kids are, 10 and under. So, how do we explain this? And there's actually some pretty good explanations for why you have certain groups missing. Children under 3 are underrepresented in most Maya mortuary contexts. And I showed that earlier when I was showing you the different sites. Um, This is due in part to differential preservation, but honestly, preservation in these caves, while the collagen's not great, the bones tend to be pretty good. So we do find, when they're there, we find infant remains. This also probably relates to them simply not being placed in these contexts. For instance, there could be a number of reasons for this. There's, in the ethnographic literature, there's descriptions of these ceremonies that occur around the age of 3 years old when children go undergo rituals that kind of give people are like, okay, I think this kid's going to survive, and so they start investing in him. There's this ritual like a second birth, saying that they're part of the community at that stage as well. Um, if you look at, for instance, Teotihuacan, and you compare that to Midnight Terror, this is a study by Jim Brady and Prout. What they found is that you can see here that compared to, for instance, Teotihuacan, the Midnight Terror ones look really, really different. Okay. They're just looking at the children. So they're not looking at the adults. There are adults at both Teotihuacan and Midnight Terror, but this is just considering the relative frequency of subadults, which I would say is a little misleading, but you still get the idea that there's a lot of 5 to 10-year-olds. So maybe there are some parallels then with some of these rain related rituals. Well, where are the middle and old adults? And that's really interesting. Remember what I said about that military ceremony, that cemetery earlier. If you're taking individuals from one place, you're not able to put them in another place necessarily. So that's really, really interesting. Note the elites. All right, I'm going to go back to this Cucina and Teasler graph here. And what you're seeing then is if you look at the elites, these are the ones that are buried in tombs, for instance, in really fancy contexts and fancy buildings. What do you not see? You don't see children. Barely at all. So you see a few late adolescents, sort of 15 to 20. We see these sometimes in caves as well. But what you see is you see all of these age classes that are mostly missing from caves. You see the people that are in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s, and a lot of old adults as well. These are simply the people that we don't find in caves. So where are those adults? They're in the tombs. If you don't have kids in the tombs, you have to put the kids somewhere. And so if you put these next to one another, if you put these age distributions next to one another, what you get is you get something that looks suspiciously like a real, age distribution, one that you would expect, minus the infants. Hmm. Um, okay. So what I did is I looked at all of the individuals from the site of Aktun Kabul, which is another large cave site similar to Midnight Terror, where I worked, the AKB Aktun Kabul, and I compared that to the Libin, Ohio. That's the Native American cemetery. It seems to be where everybody in the community was buried, and it really, the red lines, this really looks like what you would expect from a cemetery. And what I was able to show is that, yeah, definitely not enough 0 to 2-year-olds, not enough infants, and we don't have enough older adults, like middle and old adults. They are simply missing. But if you look at 3 to 9-year-olds, and that's the sacrifice group, right, from Mexico, that's the ones that they're really focusing on for sacrifice. And you look at the proportion of them to 10 to 19-year-olds to young adults, so 20 to 30-year-olds, what you see is that that proportion is basically the same. So what you have is you have a normal age distribution, but you just have the ends cut off. Those people are being placed in other contexts. So the idea that there's too many there's too many subadults is not wrong, but it's not right. There are other explanations that explain this just as well, and in my opinion, better. Okay, so I'll start wrapping up a little bit here, but the other things that people have talked about that sort of have suggested this, they talk a lot about perimortem trauma. The fact that we don't see much evidence of perimortem trauma is often, you can say absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Absolutely true. There's definitely more ways to kill people, and then preservation doesn't always won't always show those cut marks, for instance. We do see a few scattered instances where people have suggested that there's cut marks. I have seen some of these, some of them have not been published, but there are other explanations as well. So, for instance, at the site of this is one that's been cited a few times at Eduardo Quiroz cave. There was a child that was buried, and this is the drawing, a very crude drawing of this child. And David Pendergast, very well received archaeologist, had suggested that the child's had trauma to the outside of the skull, including this like little hole in the head right here. And I asked him about that, and I asked him to send me a picture of the child, and this is what he sent. And so it's not a cracked open skull. This is just the exposed surface of the skull that has been worn away. You can see that white bone there as well. So there's no evidence of any sort of like postmortem or perimortem trauma right there that anybody could see. If it was there, there's no way to see it now. I've seen examples of this as well. So, for instance, this is a really intriguing skull, I have to say. But a friend of mine went into this cave, saw this skull, took a picture of it, and then I came back the next week, and it looked like on the right, somebody had dropped their camera on it, I think. So all of a sudden, it now looks like that individuals had their head bashed in, but not quite. Um, I'm into taphonomy. I'm into the idea of what happens to skeletons after burial. And so down on the bottom left, you can see I was told by an archaeologist who will remain nameless that these individuals had clearly had their heads bashed in. And what you can actually see is that the break patterns are not consistent with that. You just have to trust me on that. And then these lines along the skull are actually calcium carbonate lines. And so these individuals had been upside down, flowstone had washed over them. The bottoms of the skulls had become kind of cemented to the cave floor. And then somebody at some point in time, actually quite a while ago, picked them up or kicked them, and that snapped them off. And so that's the better explanation for what those are. And then on the right, this is from giraffe heel, and you can see these very strange looking marks, perhaps cut marks. Those are actually from termites. So I did a whole paper on osteophagous insect damage, and so this is termite chewings on these bones as well. All right. So in general, what we see is that a lot of the part I get frustrated with cave archaeology related to sacrifice is that when you read these articles, there's often these statements that it is known that caves are places of sacrifice. This has not been demonstrated, but it is known. And so therefore, everything in the caves that come after it must relate to these sacrifices. What I will say is that this makes a really compelling story. But as a scientist, it's not it doesn't really match up. People will just say, "Well, I know it's." I've had people tell me, "But I know," and you're like, "Yeah, but how do you know?" And that then they can't really answer that very well. So I've been pushing a lot of more science in these as well. There's some really great stuff that's coming out, and I think some of the new techniques are really, really promising. I want to point to one of your future speakers is Keith Proofer, and he has a new paper out with the team with Esther Brielle and the team, David Reich's team at Harvard, where they're looking at a lot of the DNA from these different groups from different sites. And Keith's done a lot of work in caves in the Maya Mountains. And what he found then is he found these tooth caches, so just big piles of teeth in different sites. And some of these include caves, they include tombs as well. And he convinced David Reich to run the DNA for all of them. So they ran hundreds and hundreds of teeth and just individual ones. And I won't like lead you through this complicated looking thing on the right, but basically what it is, it's a family tree. And the punchline is what they're finding is that they are finding the same individual buried in multiple places. So they're buried not only in a tomb, but they're also buried in caves. So the tombs, they're being placed in the tomb as a whole burial. Some of the bones are being taken from that tomb and they've been moved to caves and they've been deposited there. And that we actually have the evidence, the DNA evidence to show that those are the exact same individuals. These are adults though. So this is not exactly what's going on in Central Belize, but it also shows the importance of really thinking through these data before we leap to conclusions about our interpretations too. And with that, I will just end by saying, I think what all of us can probably agree on at this part is that the bioarchaeological signatures of Maya caves vary significantly. I think we all realize they were doing a lot of different things in these caves. This suggests that the caves were used in a variety of ways, but what I'd like to caution again is that we need to be very careful as far as analysis and contextualization of each deposit prior to interpretations. And thank you very much.
Alrighty, Gabe. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Many thanks. Oh, you're
Mhm.
mentioning Jaime Awe,
Oh,
Crystal
yeah.
Dunke, Sean Morton. Sean Morton's going to be giving a program next year, and I'll be asking Jaime. I mean, I've hung out with Jaime a lot, and one of our most popular Aztlander YouTube videos is with Jaime when I met with him at explaining those panels from Naranjo. Continue to share. You can stop your share.
There we go. Great.
All righty. Um, we don't have, let me look, let me check again. I've asked people a second time. Please, y'all check your chat. I've greeted you all individually, and a few of you people I've asked if you want to sign up for next year. Um, Splendid lecture. You got cheers, you got clapping hands. Nobody really has a question in the chat feature. Let me see what this is. Rudy says thank you. Hola, Rudy. He's with the Palm Beach Archaeological Society. Matt, is Matt still here? Matt, you want to unmute and make any comments about speleonteleology? He's with the National Society. Erica says, what a great lecture. And let's say Miguel says, thanks, Jim, for organizing these great lectures. Okay, let's see. Sim says, great lecture. Can you talk about the 9 levels of the underworld versus the 13 levels of the upper world?
No, I cannot.
I'm going to be mentioning that in my program in August, Arnold. Uh, because I've been with my spiritual elders when the gods have shown their faces, and it's all very real to me. I've had out of the very conscious out of body experiences, especially one I'll recount while trying to sleep on top of the Castillo El Cucan pyramid at Chichen Itza uh when whoever is guarding the spirits, whoever gods, whatever, Alush, definitely knew they had a gringo to play with, and they played with me. Uh, so I'll be recounting that experience. So be sure to tune into your Aztlander and attend my presentation. I even worked with AI to create a visual of that astral experience. So I'm a firm believer. Here's a person in the waiting room who's more than an hour late. Uh, is there anybody? Matt, you've unmuted. You want to make some comments? Come
I
on,
saw a
Matt.
few questions come up on the chat too, so I don't know if, right.
Uh,
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Mike is still off. Come on, Matt, get it together.
Yep. Right.
Uh, Barb McLeod has a specific unpublished believed cave in mind.
Yeah, we've talked about this. I'm still I just got back from my sabbatical, Barb, so I'm been meaning to get in touch with you. I've been engaged in Australian archaeology, which has been awesome. But I'm getting my mind wrapped back around the Maya world. But yeah, I'll definitely be reaching out about your cave. I'm very intrigued with that.
And what do you find in Australia? Any similarities in mortuary contexts?
Oh, it's really complex. I have to say, yeah, that's a whole nother lecture. But generally, it's pre-agricultural groups, and I was able to look at a series of skeletons, which is really rare in Australia. Their laws as far as human remains are much more stringent. They're kind of the original NAGPRA. And as a result, they just don't do bioarch there anymore. And so I was brought in working with an indigenous group near Adelaide and was able to help them, think a little bit about the types of questions they might want to ask about their ancestors. And I just was met with such resounding positivity. It was just wonderful. It was a really great experience, and I'll tell you, they don't look Maya. So yeah, yeah.
But I don't know, the Maya do with the squinty eyes, the Maya, I mean, I've always heard the Chinese made their way over there during the Shanghai voyages and that
Mm.
there was some DNA, but it doesn't show up in the DNA, does it?
No, no, the Australians are yeah, quite different. I mean, they were quite isolated for quite a while for the most part. Within Australia. I mean, there's a lot of movement within Australia as well, but it's just fascinating. I did a little work in Papua New Guinea as well, and looking at those populations. So it's a whole new world over there. It's quite interesting. Yeah, but
Hey, how you doing? You got your hand up. Go ahead, Diane.
Oh, okay. First of all, I just want to say what a great presentation it
oh,
was,
thank you.
and thank you so much for standing up for intellectual rigor and science. Um, but I have a question that's not directly related to your research, and
Okay.
that is, were you using Maya helpers in your work? And also, if so, what was their reaction to encountering and dealing with the human remains?
It's a great question. In Central Belize, where I was working, we were working with local villages, and so the nearest village was actually called Armenia, like the country, and they were a group that had immigrated from El Salvador, maybe like a generation and a half or two generations previous. So not only were they not really Maya, they didn't really have any ties to the land.
Yeah.
There were also Mennonites there. And then there's, big developers from Canada. So, there's no local community to work with. The closest I had actually there were some communities that had moved into Belmopan, which was fairly nearby, and so I've reached out to them. I've been working with them a lot more than now, but at the time when I was doing my work, there really was nobody to work with. So this is something that I've always wanted to do. My new project in Sartaneja, and I'll just give a little plug for that, is it's a Maya fishing village. And so these are groups that had fled. They're from Mexico originally. They fled the caste wars in the 1800s, and they kind of got out of there, and they went just right across the bay, and they set up shop in Belize. And they have really no connection to their heritage either. And this is something that I'm hoping to this is something they're very interested in learning more about, and so I'm hoping to work with them to do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, that's the ideal, right? Like, when you'll hear Sean Morton's talk, I think that he's scheduled soon, and they have a wonderful, he and his wife Megan Paramaki Brown have a wonderful project in southern Belize where they're working with a Maya community that's right there next to the site, and it's just this ideal situation where you have a group that is that's invested like that, and there can be real dialogue with them. This is what I experienced in Australia when I was working with the Ghana people near Adelaide, and they just were. It was just a dialogue back and forth, and it was only a few days, but it was really powerful. So it's it's
Thank
just
you.
not always feasible. Yeah.
May I say, if anybody looks through their July Aztlander again, Sean Morton helped Gabe create the article that you'll see. So you'll hear a lot more from Sean, and he's not till later next year because he wants to wait for another field season and then have time for analysis. But I'll try to get him to submit some other information before his program later next year. But Gabe Alex would like to know, was there any evidence of textiles along with the skeletons?
Alex, are you talking about any particular what I'm curious where you get that question. Are you just like textiles?
Probably just likes textiles.
Okay. So there's a really interesting article that came out a while ago. Jim Brady was on it actually. I see he's left. But they found a piece of blue textile, like a blue fiber in dental calculus from a cave burial. This was one of those ones where, again, they brought it. They said, well, it's blue, so it must be Maya blue, so therefore it must be somebody, a sacrificial victim that was gagged. This is one of the theories that they came, and it was okay. I mean, it takes a while for dental calculus to form, so they would have had to been gagged for a few months, but whatever. Um, we found actually my graduate student right now, Aubrey Marshall, is doing a dissertation on dental calculus, and she's looking for plant remains that have been trapped in the teeth so we can figure out what people are putting in their mouths. And she found multiple individuals with blue fibers in a rock shelter. And this is as close as we actually have to cemeteries. Like it does seem like most people in the community are buried there. So it's real. I was just like, what? I was really excited. Some of them you can actually see knots where the fibers have been tied or gotten tangled, one of the two. But we're going to be writing that up at some point I'm actually sending those slides to a colleague in Australia who's going to do residue analysis on them. We're going to try to figure out what the blue is. So, and then say like, well, is it Maya blue? Because Maya blue is a very specific recipe.
Right.
Or is it blue tinted or is it something else? And then we're going to be talking about using that as really kind of a good jumping off point for talking about overinterpretation, like a little
Interesting.
detail.
That
Yeah,
they
so it's going
would
to be really cool.
tie little blue threads into their teeth. That's
Well, I don't know if they tied because it's like literally, I mean, it's microscopic. So it may be that it got tied or it just may be like a fiber that got tangled. And so like we don't necessarily know, but we found multiple of them in at least a couple of different individuals. So you can see that, things sneak into your teeth and it doesn't have to be, and these are not, nobody would say that these are sacrificial victims. These are clearly burials. So,
Oh, that was gonna be my next question. If
yeah.
I mean, just like who was it? Mel Gibson. I mean, they painted the sacrificial blue.
Right. Yeah.
Everything was blue, so they
Yeah.
could have been putting a blue tailor in their mouths before they were sacrificed. I mean,
Yeah.
it
Well, you
could.
see some I'm blanking. Barbie, you can help us on this one. There's this actually comes from murals where they have these warriors that have been captured and they're off for sacrifice and they're painted blue. Is that Kalakmul? Where is that?
I honestly don't know.
Oh, all
This is
right.
a late classic mural with
Yeah, or maybe
captives painted blue.
Bangkok. Yeah, something.
I
Yeah.
can't. I feel
Um,
like I should know, but
yeah,
I don't.
oh, sorry, I put you on the spot. I was like
It's all
ready for
right.
you to shine.
I'm happy to be on the spot. I actually did ask you an earlier question about what criteria you would accept
Oh,
as
sure.
being absolute evidence among cave finds, cave remains of
Um,
sacrifice. And of course, that's leading up to the cave that I had started to
right.
tell you about in our correspondence. And that is
Yeah.
quite a big story. I mean, I'm sure that the evidence for that, at least the documentation of that cave and the reports I assume are still available in the Belize Archaeology Department. I would
I
hope.
asked them, I did ask them about it, and they said they didn't know.
Oh,
So,
well, they better dig deeper because
but yeah, that's
I was there.
yeah, no, I believe you. I believe you.
I
So it's
was there.
probably they're I will say that they are doing an amazing job right now, kind of organizing. But that's needed to happen for quite a while. So I think that they're still just catching up.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I'll just comment right now, just for the sensationalistic aspect of
Yeah.
it, that that in this particular cave, which was unknown until some chicaneros brought it to the
Hmm.
attention of some people in the forestry department at Augustine, and they in turn told Joe Palacio, the archaeological commissioner, who was my boss at that time, and he sent me and Carol Jo Russian up to have a look at it. And we spent, I think, 4 nights at the Chicotero camp and spent several days in sequence at this cave. It was a shaft entrance. We had to actually make a bush ladder to get down into it. There was, right as you got down to the base of the pit entrance, there was a little ledge with a skull with flattened forehead just sitting
Hmm.
right there on the ledge, as if to say, all ye who enter here,
Yeah.
do not pass. Um, and then inside there were, I'd say, a dozen or so, again, from memory. This was probably 1974. From memory, mostly extended skeletons, none of whom had heads.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
then, but that's not even the punchline. On one of those trips during that several day period, I noticed something in the corner that looked as though it was artificial, like a poorly constructed artificial wall, but it had a little crawl space underneath it. So I moved a few stones out of the way and wriggled in there. And lo and behold, there was a pile of skulls in that corner of the room that had been walled off. And you think,
Mm.
aha, those are the heads that are missing. And so
Sure.
I'm just going to ask you now, what do you make of this? What story other than sacrifice?
Yeah.
And I can think of one other story, but tell me, what story
Sure.
comes to mind for this?
Absolutely. So, what I would do is that again, very intriguing. As a bioarchaeologist, we love situations like that because it's a mystery, and so you're trying to figure out what's going on. And one of the things that I would point out is that there's a great paper by Keith Proofer in southern Belize where they talk about a shaman burial, and he
I
has
know
like
it. I know the one. Yeah.
yeah, and what you notice is that his head's missing too. But this is very, very clearly a burial that has that where the head had been removed. We see this behavior where we see movement of skull, we see movement of bones and in particular skulls from tombs all the time. So the idea that somebody would die and then the head be removed, there's a lot of different situations where that could be the case, right? So one of the things I would be curious about is, for instance, do you see any of the vertebrae, the cervical vertebrae with the skull, or do you see the skull actually like all the cervical vertebrae with the body and then the skull by itself? That would be
Oh,
really, really interesting.
yeah. I mean,
Are the jaws still articulated? That's another really interesting because what you want to do is you want to try to figure out, well, when did the head get moved? So there's a lot of questions to ask. And I would say, as a good scientist, one of the hypotheses would definitely be decapitation. Like that 100%. But I don't think you can just go in there and say, well, it's sacrif sacrifice decapitation. You need to have more, yeah, you need to like look at it more because otherwise, like I've argued this with some of the other folks, some of the archaeologists. It's like if you already know the story, like what's the point of looking, right? Like half the fun is trying to figure out what's actually happening and collecting data. I love talking with different specialists to try to get their take on things, and you just sort of add pieces to that puzzle, and eventually you're getting a much more complete picture. So
well, I
that
will
would be
say
my
that it's likely that most of the skulls are still in that pile.
I
And
would love to
that
find it.
pile was pretty nasty with a lot of mud and and just
Yeah,
sort of this gnarly mess of mud and flowstone that had just seeped in and filled in all of the spaces. But I would guess 15, 20 visible skulls and reasonably
sure.
articulated, and then we collected two of them and
Mm.
took them back to the archaeology department, wrapped them up very nicely, and I believe those two skulls did have the first cervical vertebra attached.
Interesting. Yeah, that would be very, very
Uh,
interesting piece of data. Yeah.
and Joe Palacio would be the person to ask, or at least any notes that he made on that, because he was the one who wrote that up. I delivered those personally to him.
Yeah. Well, I'm
And
going back in October for Archaeology Day to help with the Institute of Archaeology, and so I'll follow up on that for sure because that would be really, really interesting to see.
well,
So yeah, I appreciate you. Any thoughts you have. I would also actually go back to a previous comment, the one about who was asking me if I could talk about the different levels of the underworld and the answer is no. But again, there's only so much one person really knows. And so one of the things that I say, not only just trying to do the best science we can, but really relying on a lot of specialists, people who know things that I acknowledge I don't know that much of. And so, having these insights into like the ethnohistoric record, which, I had to learn about. It took me quite a while, but knowing people who knew that and being able to talk to them about the ethnohistoric record or talking about plant remains or talking about textiles or, talking about different areas. Like so much of what we think we know about Belize is based on Mexico. And that's that's just different people. They spoke different language, like they lived in a lot of cases. They were talking about two different time periods. And this goes back to that problems that they had in the Southwest where you're just conflating, people are conflating all of these ideas and they just say the Maya. But as you know, the Maya, that they never used the term the Maya. Like they didn't think of themselves as all the same. They thought of themselves as quite different. So we have to try to just it's complicated, but that's the fun. If it weren't complicated, I think we'd get bored.
And Barb, I've asked David Sadata on mic, but he's not responding. I don't know if you're communicating with him in the chat, but he's not on micing.
okay.
Gabe, in a very early slide, you showed a map of the rock shelters as well
Yeah.
as caves you had explored. Could you say a bit about what a rock shelter is?
Sure. I used to have that in this lecture, and I'd go to like an hour and a half. And so I was like, I need to cut something. So but I'm glad you asked it. I actually started working in Central Belize because of rock shelters. And what's really interesting about them is that they're basically very shallow caves. They're light zone caves, so you don't need artificial light to view them. They're just sort of overhangs on the sides of rock faces. Some of them are very small, some of them are quite big. Sometimes there's a little cave attached to them. Um, but what we know is, especially in that area, people often use them for burial. So the Caves Branch Rock Shelter I actually worked at in 1994, my second season in Belize. And I got to go out there, and there was this Spanish archaeologist working out there. And he was like, "Yeah, you could help." And so I got to excavate a burial, and I just thought, "Oh my God, it's just all burials." There's probably 400 or 500 burials in this one small rock shelter, the Caves Branch Rock Shelter. It is a mess because there's no stratigraphy. It's like digging in talcum powder. Like it's all just really, really like fine, and you can't see any stratigraphy. It's all the same color. So what you're doing is you're digging down, you hit bones, and then you're following those and you're trying to see if it's a whole skeleton. The answer is it's not. It never is a whole skeleton. And then you sort of see where it's cut off. And then you say, okay, it's cut off here. So there's probably a burial that's cut through this individual. And it was really, really complicated. My God, it was the worst place to start, when I was a young scholar. I should have
Mhm.
started somewhere much easier. But what we found is that those sites were generally used for burial prior to the dark zone caves. So most of those date to the late pre-classic period through the very, very early classic period. So about 300 BC through 300 AD. And they are quite different. for instance, if you look at the caves, most of the individuals have artificial cranial modification. A lot of them have filed teeth. Nobody from the rock shelters has that. It's all just natural head shape, natural teeth. They're buried with very, very simple grave goods when they're buried with grave goods at all, which is rare. They have pretty much like the age sex distribution is exactly what you'd expect from a cemetery. So a lot of infants, and then, fewer kids, and then more young adults, and then goes down for older adults. And so it really looks like this is a community cemetery as well. Some of these rock shelters are more specialized, but Caves Branch was like that as well. So I was excited because we just don't get that in the Maya area. You can't look at a population, you can't get population level statistics in the Maya area because the cemetery, like there's no cemetery. So you're digging tombs, and if you just work in tombs, you know what rich old men look like for the most part, a few women. That's kind of it. So I thought, oh, this is the opportunity. And then as I started exploring that area, we were being pointed to caves, and I was in there with Cameron Griffith. We were the first people to recon Midnight Terror, and I just thought, wow, this is unbelievable. And then we were pointed to the big civic ceremonial sites in that area too, which people hadn't documented, and that was really exciting. We found the carved monuments, and anyway, it's pretty cool. But let me tell you, the logistics, no, I'm done. I'm too old for that. So I really hope. I've been encouraging my younger, colleagues, and like, please go work there. It's so cool. Like, I want somebody to find out what's going on, but not for me.
Well, I'll
Dave,
just say briefly that does make me think about the question I asked, was going to ask of David Sadat. Gordon's
he's
Caves.
unmuted now.
Okay, Gordon's Caves in the Copan Valley.
Mm,
Hundreds and hundreds of cremains in particularly one particular cave. And I believe excavated around the end of the 19th century, if I remember correctly. So
yeah.
maybe David can tell us more about that.
David,
He's muted again now.
now he's going back and forth. Muted, unmuted, muted, unmuted. Get it together, David. This can't happen during your presentation. Now he might be gone. No, he's there.
Well, I'll say until he figures that out. The Gordon's Caves are really, really interesting. But again, they're doing something different there. This is not Central Belize at all, and it's not what Keith's finding in the Maya Mountains as well. Like that's quite different. So again, I think this at least points to the idea that when we say the Maya did this, like you can't say that because the Maya, they're a really diverse group of people, and so again, over space and time, and I think the Gordon Caves stuff too. I'm not even sure those were Maya. I think that's like one of those like edge of the Maya. There's two different cave systems down there. They both had human remains in it. One of them's not Maya. I can't remember which one it is. Gordon's Cave I know is right by Copan, so maybe that one was Maya.
All right, David's unmuted again. Come on,
David, tell me what I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah. Can you hear me? All the way from Copan.
Hey, you're in Copan. Very cool.
Okay, yeah. Gordon Caves, make my ears stand up. I've been to the Gordon Caves, and of course, I can say one thing: they're hard to get to, and the second thing, a lot of the bones that I did see still sticking up from cracks and crannies had red cinnabar. Red cinnabar, just like some of the tombs in the deep of the Acropolis. I've also been to the Cuyamel caves, and those are even harder to get to.
Yeah.
But I can't say that I'm an expert at all on the caves. I grew up in the Alta Verapaz on Huanchamelco. I went in caves when I was young. I saw a lot of bones in caves. I saw bones that were abnormally large, not human bones. I saw all sorts of things. I wish I would have known all about this. my kudos to the presenter here. I wish I'd have known all about this years and years ago.
Oh, thanks.
Are the Gordon Caves, is that in Honduras?
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're in the Copan Valley.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
it's the Cuyamel
Yeah.
caves are the ones I was thinking of that are not. They're like outside of the Copan Valley, and so they're the ones that I think are not Mayan. They're super early, right? Like they're middle pre-classic or something. There's some really,
That's
really.
right.
Sorry?
Very early,
Yeah.
and right up where I grow vanilla. So I
Mm.
feel a very special connection. I can see right in front the place that Linda Shealy and I called Moweeks, the Cerro Colorado that
Mhm.
has just the shape of a macaw. It's red and it has a
Mm.
knobbly appearance. The root word "mo" is like little mushrooms, so the kind of feature that macaws' faces have on them, the little knobbly things that their faces have. So Linda and Sheila and I wrote this Copan note that unfortunately never got published.
Mm.
But anyway, a fascinating presentation on the deep mysteries of cave lore.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Um, our speleologist had phoned in, so he's got Matt. You want to
But
say anything?
well, first of all, outstanding presentation, and I will lead with the disclaimer that I'm not an archaeologist. I'm far more into the geology side of things, but we do intersect one another once in a while, often in burial sites, across the Western United States, across North America certainly. So learning this element of your work down in Central America was just outstanding. I did try to. I had never heard of bone damage from termites before, so that fascinated me, and I tried to download your article, and it's locked behind a journal. May I send you an email to get a copy of that?
Yeah, please.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And I have one humorous anecdote that I think you'll appreciate. The image in my screenshot is a hydrothermal site that I'm working on in Nevada. It's heavily mineralized,
Oh, yeah.
and the travertine apron surrounding the spring is literally 100 acres wide. So there's so much mineralogy coming out of the spring. It's 170-degree water. So being the professional science aficionado that I am, last Halloween I bought a case of plastic skulls, and we're dipping them in the spring and slowly creating our own crystal skulls.
Amazing. Oh, wow.
Anyway, thank you so much for the talk. That was outstanding, and I will send you an email for that
Absolutely.
Osteophage article.
Yeah,
thank you.
that's great. Yeah, I did a paper on it was and it was both from Gireftiel, that one cave I showed you with the chamber of bones, and there was termite damage, and there was also dermestid beetle damage, and so that was like I was very excited about. And then when I was in Australia, I was looking at a skeletal collection from Papua New Guinea, and there's this new thing, and I was like, "What? This is insect. I've never seen this." And so it's what is it? Anyway, it's another type of insect that's not been published. So we're weevils. Weevils. I got weevil damage. And you know what the name of our article is? It's wait, weevil.
The lesser of two weevils.
That's it. That's it,
Did I
Barb.
actually get it?
The lesser of two weevils. Yeah. So you wait for it. It's coming.
Arnold would like to know, have you looked into migration as an effect of extended drought, especially beginning after 1000 CE?
Great question. And no, not really. It's hard. We would love to do that. The problem is that all of the Maya people, archaeologists, love the classic period. They love it. And so most of what we have is from the classic period. The post-classic, we don't have huge skeletal samples. And so other than, trying to figure out all this information from ceramics, which could be moved through trade as well, like we don't really know. It's hard to parse out people versus ideas and who's moving and which ones are moving. As I said, David Reich's study is massive. There's so many skeletons involved, so we're starting to get a really good picture of that. But most of it really is classic period. We don't have enough post-classic. One of the things I'm trying to do in Neha, my new project, is that actually is a post that has a good post-classic component to it, and I'm very interested in the post-classic now, and so I'm hoping to study that. Yeah.
All right. Miguel would like to know, is it possible to confirm if all or most of Chichen Itza cenote's human remains were sacrifices? I understand that it's not really possible to confirm it.
Yeah, great question. I have been able to study the remains from the cenote that are at the Peabody. That collection has been split in two, and so half of it's at the Peabody at Harvard, and half of it is in Mexico City, and that's hard to get access to. What's really interesting is that a lot of the children from Chichen Itza, the cenote, some of them have cut marks on them. They look really sick, like those kids from that dry cave in Chiapas, which I mentioned. So I think that there's a good chance that was part of it. But we also have adults in that cave. There's a lot of things going on in that cenote. And so I think it's possible that some of those kids were part of fertility rituals. One of the things we know from the ethnohistoric record too is very funny is the young women were often thrown in there as well. But the idea was that they were supposed to kind of get to that liminal space before they died. And then right as they were about to die, you drag them out, and then the priest would ask them what the god said. And sometimes it was too late, and so the girls would die. But a lot of times it was just for them to get close to death. So they weren't actually meant to die.
Yeah.
Um, there's a great story I read. Again, I don't know the context of it, so maybe it's wrong, but I thought it was a great story. It's basically one of these women, they were like they were like, "We're gonna throw you and you're gonna tell us what the gods say." And she was like, "No, absolutely, I won't tell you a thing." And they're like, "No, but you have to, because if the gods say, nope, I'm not gonna do it." And then they got really frustrated with her and they're like, "Fine, find somebody else." So they let her go. I hope that story is true.
So, Ed in Chicago has a question. You want to go ahead, Ed?
Yes, yeah.
Sure.
A couple of questions. First, do you know how the people were sacrificed? And were they all similar, or were they sacrificed in different ways?
Um, Again, no is the answer. Again, I don't. I mean, part of what I'm trying to find out is, were they killed, or are these, necessarily? So we know that, especially in Mexico, we have the work of Vera Tiesler and Andrea Cucina. They have done amazing work, really looking at these records, ethnohistoric records and also artistic records of different rituals that involved killing or maiming. And they look at the bones really carefully to actually see if if they're talking about defleshing somebody, for instance. There's this great, amazing ritual called shipe, where a priest would basically skin a victim, and except for the hands and the feet, and then they would wear the skin and they would dance around in this hallucinogenic haze in the sun, until they passed out, like several days later. And Vera has actually found a context where it's just feet, 2 feet, 2 hands. And it was like, okay, that looks pretty, and there's cut marks, and they're like, oh, it's pretty good. And so, um, again, time and space, there's a lot of different ways to hurt people. And a lot of what we're doing is we trying to figure out that, like, when we can actually document it is really important. But then also the context, like, what does it mean? Like, what are they doing? Um, you know, One of the problems I have too is this idea of sacrifice is just thrown around as like a catch-all. You're like, it's sacrifice, and you're like, yeah, but that's not interesting. I mean, they're killing somebody, but what do you mean by sacrifice? Like it's and so some of the work Vera's doing, for instance, is really talking about, trying to contextualize trying to identify the actual ceremony and then thinking about what that ceremony was and why it was performed in that particular way, in that particular time, in that particular place.
And then similarly, going back to your comment about defleshing, can you tell if the sacrificed individuals were defleshed before they were placed wherever they were placed?
Great question, right? So, there are ceremonies that are described as, like, for instance, it's I'm trying to remember the reference. Anyway, there's references where there's you might think, oh, there's defleshing, and so therefore that's probably related to sacrifice. But in fact, it actually has this is documented for post-mortem, right? Like, so in other words, it's not a bad thing. You're doing it, you're cleaning the skull and you're
Right.
cleaning the bones. And so you see scrapes on the bone and you're like, well, I still don't know if that was perimortem, it happened right at the time of death, or if this is, a year later, they're just, they're taking their father's bones and they're cleaning them off and they're scraping them. We don't always know. And so again, it's such a shame we don't have a better written record of the Maya, because then we would know a lot more about them. But to be honest with you, what we probably know is a lot more about the Yucatec Maya in Mexico. So,
Okay.
and then it would be like,
Well,
well, in Belize, they must be doing the same thing. And I don't think they.
just
Yeah.
curious, because I know they moved the bones around after
Yeah,
the person was
absolutely.
dead.
Yeah.
So also, of course, I'm not a fan of putrescine or cadaverine or the other odoriferous amines that we make when we die and are putrefying.
Yeah.
But I would imagine, it was going to be one hell of a stink.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
and so if you didn't deflesh and bury that or some other way get rid of
Yeah.
it, I mean, it would have just been really not real pleasant to be around.
Yeah, absolutely. There's discussions about like, I know that these are sacrificed. In one part, like, oh, they're put in an area we would never put a loved one. Like it's put in water or it's put in this muddy area, and you think, well, yeah, but if one of the goals is to actually get this person defleshed into skeletal form so you can move them around, this is a great place to put somebody because it's going to wash, water's washing away the flesh. And, so again, you have to put yourself in the mind of somebody who lived 1,300 years ago from a completely different culture, which is tough. But that's part of that process of trying to think, well, what else might this mean? And so
We're veering a little bit away from your topic, but I am curious, was the sacrifice an honor or a punishment, or do we know?
great question.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, what we know a bit from, and again, we're relying on Diego de Landa for a lot of this stuff, who's not a great person, and so I'll say he's a man of his time and place, but
And had his own cultural lenses as well.
you betcha he did, and so like one of the things he did mention that does seem to be borne out by some of the skeletal data around Chichen Itza is that oftentimes like these kids who are sacrificed are really sickly, like they are not going to survive very much longer. And so the Maya have these complicated practices where they think about reincarnation. So they'll bury the dead in the house floors, and what they'll do is then they'll wait, and then the next person born, they'll be like, oh, they started over, and they'll just name that person the same name, in that case. So you do have these really complex belief systems, and so is it I'm sure the kids didn't think it was great, but at the same time, it's hard to understand exactly what was happening. through our lens. Like we have very particular ideas, right? And they had a very different worldview, and so
Well, sacrificing people has given me some good ideas for my next cave trip I lead.
great, great. Where's that going to be?
I think I until the statute of limitations ran out, I think I should not answer that.
Okay.
We do in Central California. We do have ossuary caves. I believe they're ossuary caves of the prehistoric Miwok, and I'm wondering how many cultural parallels, even without contact, if there are cultural parallels between underground burials across societies.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think people have come up with the same ideas over and over and over for sure. And ossuaries, I mean, this is what I think I'm seeing, for instance, I think this is what's happening in Midnight Terror Cave and then the nearby Aktun Kabul, which is where I worked, is you don't see, you don't see burials really that are articulated. So there was one chamber where I was working, and there's different areas where there's different bones. And in the front of this one chamber are piles of bones that are mostly a single individual, but it's mixed up a little bit, but they're discrete piles. The looters have been in there and they've messed things up, but you can see it's like groups of people. And then as you get further back into the cave, the bones are smaller and they're more mixed up. So I think what's happening is that you move into this cave as a dead person. They lay you out. They're waiting for you to deflesh, and then there's ceremonies. They move you to this other cave where you become an ancestor, and there's a pile and it's secondary burial. And then eventually, when the last person who knew you dies, you're gone, right? Sort of sad to think about, but for the most part. And then you're sort of shifted to the back of this cave and you just become mixed with all your ancestors and you be kind of, part of that ancestral pool. And there's something really pretty about that. And that's really how ossuaries work, no matter where in Europe or California or wherever. So
we have seen evidence of animal relocation of remains.
Yeah.
There's a huge population of rodents pretty much anywhere you might find caves.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, we don't see rodent marks on the bones in the back of these caves, which is fascinating. But I think that probably is one of the reasons why they're back there, is they're kind of left alone. And if you think about, too, the symbology of, a hollow space in the middle of a mountain-like structure, like that's what you have with the pyramid and tombs. And so that's also very, very similar. But yeah, no rodent remains. Very cool.
And what's the basic difference between ossuary and mortuary remains?
Well, an ossuary tends to be like a big, kind of a big open area where basically the remains become more fragmented and more mixed with one another. So it's basically a space where you're moving bones around. We see this in tombs a lot. I showed a picture of a tomb. Basically, what had happened is you have people laid out in tombs. We see this all the time in the Maya, and then some of the bones are taken out, other ones are shoved to the side as a new body is laid in there as well. It's exactly what we see in caves. It's what we're seeing in the rock shelters, but except they're digging and they hit bones and then they take the bones, they move them off to the side, and they'll sometimes pile them and then they cover the bodies back up. So
less ceremony, more of a dumping ground.
Well, it probably is both, right? I mean, if you think about like the big ossuaries in like in New Orleans, right? Like you've got the big crypt with all of the whole family in there. And generally who's in there, but there's a lot of people that are just, after a few hundred years, you don't really know everybody who's in there. And they're just mixed, but these are your ancestors for sure. If you put that on a piece of land and you buried all your ancestors there for 200 years, that's a pretty good case that that's your land too. And we know the Maya are doing some of that as well.
Sim, did you have another question?
Yeah, just to follow up, Gabe. You mentioned that it's very difficult to get the sort of death statistics for the general population because, generally the tombs are for the upper class and everything. You also mentioned that I think the modern Maya, no, maybe a bit further back, but not quite classical, that the normal people buried their ancestors in under the floor of the family home. So now when you do excavations for just general things, pot shards and the normal villages, and you find out how many farmers there were, etc., scattered among the central plaza, um, can you get some evidence, a shadow of that general population statistics from bones that you might find just in peasants' homes and things like that?
Yeah, and once again, we just don't see everybody buried under the floors. Um, some people are, and then like why? Like why is this person buried? Like we have no idea, to be honest with you. We suspect that this is an ancestor. One of the really cool things that's happening now is all this genetic data. So what we're
Oh,
seeing, we've often said, oh, these are families, but this is based on ethnographic data. It's based a little bit on some ethnohistoric data, like um, Delanda says, oh yeah, they buried their people under the floor. I mean, they didn't bury all their people. They did bury some of their people. But now we can actually test who's
mhm,
related to who. And
mhm, mhm.
great stuff. Like people are finding, again, Keith Proofer's stuff, they're actually finding like 9 generations of males that are all buried in the same tombs. I'm working on a paper with Christoph Helmke right now from Belize, from this particular area on a site called Pooks Hill. And we found 4 generations of males all buried in the same little plaza group as well. And some of the other people are related to. And so we're kind of tracing back like, okay, this is actually allowing us to test ideas about the meaning of being buried in particular places. Because again, the sciences, I find that a lot of the archaeology, the ethnography, the art history, these are really generating a lot of our ideas. But I think the science is really important for being able to answer a lot of this. And so I mean, I'm just a science geek, but you know, that's what I believe. But when I started doing bioart, man, back in college, so like right around the late 80s, I mean, there was just nothing. We could do age and we could do sex, we could do some pathologies, and that was it. I mean, we had nothing. And now the toolkit at our disposal is just ridiculous. So we're learning so much more, even though we've been studying this so long. It's just like this new world. So it's fun. Yeah.
Oh, one last thing. For this title, Lesser of Two Evils. If you do the study on the skeletons, whole skeletons, you can have something about skeletons out of the closet, right?
Definitely. There's already skeletons in my closet is already that's been used. So for like
Oh,
we
sorry.
we
Okay.
looked at we looked at the Weevil one. We were like, has anybody used this? And then they have, but it was like in a different field. And we're like, we can do it. We can do it. It's a different field. And so, it'll still be original.
Thanks a
Yeah.
lot.
I mean, yeah, this is one of the things we try to do is you got to come up with puns. And sadly, it's been generations of people coming up with puns. So they're few and far between now.
um, I
In
don't.
the Netherlands, sorry.
Go ahead, Sim.
Oh, sorry. In the Netherlands, up to about I think in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, even with your PhD thesis, you used to always have a sort of a punny line, or you could. It was quite common to have a punny line in your title page,
Yeah.
but it's sort of died out that tradition, I think.
Yeah. I've tried to do it. I'm awful at it. I've tried to do it and I'm just not good. And I feel like if I could come up with a good one, I'd do it, but I can't. So, but this one, it's like, oh, we're gonna do it. That'll be great. Yeah.
All right.
Sorry, Jim.
There is a question about um, have you compared sea levels to the flooding of the caves compared to elevation of cave entrances?
Great question. For the well, not me, no. The sea levels don't seem to have affected that very much. By the classic period, the sea levels are more or less where they are now. I mean, they've definitely risen a bit, but The more drastic stuff you have is, of course, following the Pleistocene. And so this is, 12, 10, 12,000 years ago. And
Yeah.
so
That's an us question. We
yeah.
can give you that data set if you want it.
All right. We can, we'll talk. I'll send you the article and
But
we can
but you're right. I mean, historically, in the timescales that you're looking at, there hasn't been a ton of variation.
Yeah. I mean, we can see a little, like when I was working on the Keys, I could see where they built up the plaza a little bit because they were probably getting little flooding events, but yeah, not too much. But the earliest human remains we have in this area are actually from submerged caves. And so these are ones that would have been empty in, when the first people arrived in the Yucatan Peninsula. And so now off the coast of the Yucatan, you have these, you dive down in cenotes and there's there's skeletons down there that are covered in flowstone. So that would have happened when the cave was not inundated. And then they even see like hearths where they built a fire. You see like charcoal on the ceiling where like their torch had hit the ceiling. I mean, it's pretty cool stuff. Yeah. So I keep telling there's divers that work around where I am, and I've instructed them to find me such a context, and they haven't done it. So I don't know what's up with that.
Um, the Olmec are considered the root culture of Mesoamerica, and they were to have emerged from the underground. Are there any links from Belize to Veracruz area?
There are, definitely. We have, yeah. I'm editing a book right now on coastal Maya archaeology, and we have a Veracruz chapter, which was pretty interesting. But so you should ask Jaime Awe that question. It's very, basically, we used to think that the Mayas, came from the Olmec. This is sort of the short answer, and we no longer believe that. The earliest Maya seem to be contemporaneous with the Olmec, and so therefore they're broadly Mesoamerican. They share, they share some sort of history, and so there's some similarities, but for the most part, they're quite different. And then later you have a group of Maya speaking people seems to be one of the very first branches off the Proto-Maya tree, and they go up to that area as well. And so they're sort of not Maya. They're not considered Maya.
And what could be our final question, is the sacrifice theme extended from the recent Aztec colonization versus the root civilization of Olmec Maya?
Good question. I will reiterate that, sacrifice and Maya are just really general terms. So I think to answer that question, you just have to get into a lot more specifics. One of the things I will point out, though, is that there definitely something is happening in around Chichen Itza and later Mayapan, where you get people that are clearly coming from the west, and so from central Mexico, Tula, for instance, and then also people that are so these belief systems that we see in central Mexico are all of a sudden showing up around Chichen Itza, including a lot of that really bloody imagery. And people have called this has been called the feathered serpent cult. I don't know how much I can speak beyond that, but there definitely is some cultural influence late. And so this is in the late classic period. And yeah, so I guess I don't think the Aztecs, I mean, the Aztecs certainly don't colonize, all into the Maya area. They don't make it that far. I think, had the Spanish not arrived, it's certainly feasible to think that they would have, but yeah, they never get that far. But there's some of those ideas did travel.
All right. Well, Gabe, you've done an excellent job of it all. You're
Thank
getting
you.
thumbs up and little applause hearts.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate all your questions and your attention, and it's a great discussion, really good questions, and I love this. Barb, you've already sat through this once, so I mean,
Yeah,
kudos to you, man. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, that's fantastic, and I look
definitely.
forward to reaching out to you about that cave site. Certainly, before I go down in October, hopefully we'll find that report. And Matt, I'll look forward to getting your email as well, and we can talk a little bit more about.
Thank you so
And
much for the talk tonight.
Matt, if there's anything you'd
have
like the Aztlander to publish or to give a presentation next year, please get in touch with me.
We do have some groups that do work down there. Some of it's citizen science, some of it's real. So I can poke around. My work is more in the hydrology and karst geology.
Okay.
So
All right.
I'm lurking on the Aztlan list, and that's about it.
Lurking on the Aztlan list. All righty. All right, we're losing our audience pretty quick. So thank you,
All right.
Gabe.
You bet.
Thank you, everybody that's still hanging out. Elaine, Ed, Diane, Arnold, Barb, everybody, thank you for attending tonight. And look forward to a great recording in a few days.
Great.
All
Thank
right.
you so much, Jim.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks again, Gabe. And thanks for watching this Aztlander presentation. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. To subscribe to free monthly issues of the Aztlander Voice of the Ancient Americas e-magazine, contact your host Jim Reed at jimreedmaya@gmail.com. Thanks again.